Hello everybody, my name's Dan Meredith. I lead on public affairs for E.ON and MBS. That means I try and deal with all the politicians in Westminster specifically and try and make sure they understand about energy as best they can and make some sensible decisions. I'm going to try and take through where the Labour Party is right now, what this new government looks like. I thought it'd be useful just after we've had about 12 weeks of this new government just to take stock and just show you a few of the faces that we expect to be in the ministerial roles, and that important energy is going to be a really key thing for the Labour Party and for this new government for the next 5 years, and potentially if they get their way for the next 10 years, I suspect. So useful to understand who is involved and what the plans are and what things are shaping up to be. So quickly look, we've had the general election back in July, as I'm sure you remember, and one of the most important things is that we've had a huge changing of the guard, more new MPs into their Houses of Parliament than I think we've ever had since the Second World War. So there's a lot of new people in there, a lot of new blood. They may or may not be interested in energy and may know what it's about. There are some really interesting, useful people that we know very well. That have some real expertise in energy, but there's a lot of new faces and a lot of change. Obviously, we're very aware that the Labour Party have a majority and are now in government, but there is a lot of change in the rest of the other parties as well. Obviously, the Conservatives are a much reduced force than they were in Parliament. The Liberal Democrats have a huge increase, probably their best they've ever had, with 63 gains, so over 70 Liberal Democrat MPs now, so they're going to be much more of a force in Westminster and in policy, we suspect. Back up in Scotland, the SNP, in the same way as the Tories and the rest of the country, have really come down in power, and we may see that in 2026 when there is a Scottish election for those Scottish MSPs. We may see a repeat or a change then. One of the things I think is really important to note is that at all levels of government right now, we have a real strength from the Labour Party. We had the local elections and the mayoral elections back in May, and Labour showed very well there, so have a lot of control in local government and in regional government. Obviously in Wales it is a Labour-led government. In Scotland it's not yet, but as I said, in 26 we've got election for that, and it may be the case that it goes to Labour there. So we may have pretty much all levels of government across Great Britain at least being led to some extent by the Labour Party, which is an interesting, possibly unprecedented thing, which may change the way policy works. To move on very quickly to some of the names that we've got, you may be more familiar with these now, some of these faces. The piece that I think is really interesting, which went somewhat under the radar, and we haven't seen a lot of it, it may be repeated, but back in the last Labour government, when we had Gordon Brown as Prime Minister back before 2010, there was a sort of government of all the talents, it was called, and there was a number of people put in ministerial roles who weren't necessarily Labour politicians. We've had a little bit of that again, which you may be aware. So we've had, for example, James Tinson, who is a prisons minister, who obviously runs Tinson's, you know him for locksmiths and all that kind of thing. He is very well regarded in that kind of area as someone who has really shown how a company can rehabilitate people once they come out of prison. So he's been employed, even though he hasn't really got anything to do with the Labour Party, but as a minister to try and help that as a prisons minister to help that situation. We've seen that with a number of different pieces within ministerial. You can see Patrick Vallance there is now a science minister, and so on. We may see that more in this Labour Party. But the important thing from an energy point of view are the faces in the various departments. A couple of departments I wanted to pick up, obviously DESNZ, as it's called, Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. We've got Ed Miliband, who's the Secretary of State, who's looking at this, and a lot of new faces in those junior minister roles, which are interesting. So Sarah Jones is a really important stakeholder. She holds a double brief over the Department for Business as well as the Department for Energy Security, and she is the Minister for Industry and has all of the heavy industry and energy issues in her brief. We've also got Michael Shanks, who is doing a lot of work in and around Scotland. I think he's in Scotland today, for example, looking at GB Energy and how we set that up, and the transition from that's going to have to happen in the North Sea oil and gas industry, particularly in Scotland, to come in. And then very important from a retail point of view, which is interesting for MBS and E.ON specifically, is Miata Fernbuller MP. She is a new MP, new MP for Peckham, but previously she held the sort of chief role within the think tank New Economics Foundation, for example. So she has a really deep academic understanding of how energy works, and is a very useful person to understand policy. She has been given the brief to look after energy consumers and energy retail, and specifically, and we've already had a number of meetings with Miata, and she's got a number of key plans, and it seems really to understand the industry and what needs to happen. So I'm quite positive about what that's going to happen there. And then on the right, faces that can become very important, and I'll talk a little bit about what these mean to how energy is set up. But Chris Stark, who has for a long time been the head of the Committee on Climate Change, advising government on how to make it to net zero and what needs to happen to tackle climate change, has now been taken on by Ed as a new head of mission control for Clean Power 2030. Mission control, I think, probably the best job title in the country at the moment. Chris has been taken on for that. So he sits at the centre of the web of new organisations that the Labour Party is trying to set up to try and help their clean energy power mission that they've got for 2030, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And obviously, as part of that, we've got a setup of Great British Energy, this new publicly owned organisation to get involved in investment in the energy industry. And Jürgen Meyer is going to be chair of that. He has been around for a long time, used to be the chief exec for Siemens UK, for example, and is very well regarded in the industry, and is going to be chairing GB Energy. Not just all about DESNZ though within government, as we know, that the pieces around energy policy really bleed into lots of different departments. And for example, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, as it's now called again, MHCLG, used to be the Levelling Up department in the last government. Really important both in how devolution happens and energy decisions and policy get made at a more local, place-based situation, either through Metro Mayors or through local government. This department really holds that relationship with those local government specifics, and very importantly, they hold the keys to how the planning system works. And so the effort that this government wants to make to change the way the planning system works, to shorten time for investment and decisions to be made and projects to be developed, these people are going to be really important. Matthew Pennycook has been is now the Minister of State that will be looking hugely at that, I suspect, and he's been involved in energy, particularly district heating and other areas of climate action for a long time. But I think Baroness Taylor of Stevenage, who is a new minister, long-time local government, I think, in Stevenage, she has been put in charge of some of the aspects of energy efficiency and planning around those kind of issues. So again, some really important people to the way energy is developed and energy policy developed over the next few years. Just a quick look at opposition. Clearly, we're still in the process of the Conservative Party changing their leadership, and once there is a new leader elected, I'm sure they will change who is in charge of some of these things. But for now, at least, the shadow Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero remains Claire Coutinho, who was the Secretary of State in the previous government, and equally the Secretary of State, the shadow Secretary of State for Business and Trade is Kevin Hollinrake, who also was a minister in that department at the time. The Liberal Democrats, with all of the new MPs they've now got in Parliament, have taken some time after their conference recently to change who is in charge of their spokespeople in their shadow roles. So we have the new MP for South Cambridgeshire, Pippa Heylings, who is going to be the spokesperson for the Lib Dems on energy security net zero. And we've got Sarah Gibson, who is the new MP for Chippenham, who's going to be the Liberal Democrats spokesperson on business. And then we are still in the process of new government, new parliament, setting up the various key committees, select committees that are so important in scrutinising the actions of government. And so we haven't got the full committee membership voted or agreed or confirmed yet, but we do have some of the chairs. And so just to pick out the fact that Bill Esterton, Labour MP for Sefton up in Liverpool, is the new chair of the Energy Security and Net Zero Select Committee, and Liam Byrne, MP for Birmingham in Solihull North, is the chair of the Business and Trade Select Committee, two of the key committees that are going to be holding government to account on the decisions they make, and therefore very important for the way policy on energy and industry generally is going to develop. So let's take a step back very quickly and talk about Labour's mission and how that's going to come about. So Keir Starmer was trying to put in place quite early on, back in February of last year, the idea that if there was a Labour government, he would pin missions to its government so that they would remain on target, and regardless of what was going on about them as governments get swept away by events, they would be able to keep their focus on these key missions. The missions there are around, as you'd expect from this Labour government, I'm sure you've seen in the manifestos and so on. The key one for us that I want to pick apart is the fifth one there, making Britain a clean energy superpower. This is clean electricity by 2030. And as I've said, the government had put in place Chris Stark as this mission control, and we're still yet to see exactly how this is going to work. But the idea is that in the background, in the machinery of government, to make government work together to deliver these missions as a whole, instead of becoming siloed within departments and not working together in a sensible way with industry. Chris will sit as mission control, and he will chair a mission control board where cabinet members and various people from across government departments will come together to think specifically about the mission control and the decisions and activity that is needed to deliver clean power by 2030, which should help work in a much cleaner, more focused way. And within that, there are a number of organisations that are coming together as well. So there is now quite a crowded environment of publicly organised organisations that have some role in energy and delivering this mission. And again, it's still to be seen exactly what is going to happen. But we have the creation of GB Energy, which I'll talk about in a second. We've obviously already got Ofgem. We've had the creation, or at least the nationalisation of the National Energy System Operator, which is now called NESO, from the National Grid. Their role is to very specifically say what is required, what do we need to do, what generation sources are needed, etc., for the 2030 mission to this new government. And then we've got some role within the Crown Estate, which is pulling together, obviously so important for land access for offshore wind and other things. But the Crown Estate, I think, is looking to do more, and the laws that are going to change very soon to allow Crown Estate and GB Energy to invest quite heavily in the industry is something to watch out for. So the energy superpower mission, which I'll talk about in a second, is really about tackling climate change, but recognising the fact that we are now over-indexed in this country on the use of natural gas. As you may know, we have, for example, more gas boilers in our homes than any other country in Europe. This was all very good when we had just discovered the wells of North Sea oil and gas in the last century, but now it's becoming more of a burden as it is more connected to a global market, and that market is becoming very volatile. And as we've obviously seen with the Ukraine crisis most recently, gas prices are so volatile potentially to global events that they can really give an impact on prices very quickly, and the UK is very exposed and sensitive to that far more than many other countries. And so steps need to be taken to change that. One of the changes that is going to be is to become more reliant on electricity. If we can generate our own electricity in the UK, that is not so bound to global gas and oil prices, then we can be more certain, more secure, more insulated for our prices. This is what the Clean Energy Superpower is all about. The mission, it is a very stretching mission to get anywhere near it by 2030. But this is what GB Energy and the Superpower mission is trying to achieve. So again, I'll take a few questions at the end to look at exactly what this is. But at the moment, the government is setting out a target and trying to set up the organisation that is needed to actually work this through as best they can. So let's talk quickly about GB Energy. Again, the proof will be in the pudding on this. We are still in the process really of seeing it being set up and what it will actually do. There is a real danger that GB Energy will become a little bit of everything to everyone, and won't have a very clear purpose and objective, and will be trying to do a little bit of everything and therefore will fail. But we shall see. It's got an initial capitalisation of quite significant money, but probably a small amount of money in the scale of things that actually needs to happen to get anywhere near that 2030 target. Initial capitalisation of about £8 billion. And the idea really is it is quite simple, from at least from a politician's point of view. When you look at it, there is a recognition that there is an awful lot of organisations, E.ON for example, but very particularly EDF, Ørsted, Vattenfall. There are organisations out there that are not just private companies, but are backed by other governments, EDF, a French government, Ørsted and Vattenfall in Denmark and Norway, for example. And they are investing in our infrastructure in the UK. But there is not a UK champion. There is not a UK government-backed body that is able to do that. So in some regards, this is just a very simple political question about, should there be a UK champion in that way? If we're not going to have a nationalised industry, should we at least be investing in the UK's infrastructure for the benefit of the UK people in that sense, and not just leave it to the market? So that is the general political reason for trying to do this. But there is sort of 5 things that the GB Energy is, at least in writing, is about and is going to try and achieve. There is an element of, can GB Energy help project development such that it concertinas the times to get things done quicker in some way? Can it invest in projects? Can it help projects that are maybe not going to get invested in the private sector, that aren't quite there yet from a commercial viability point of view? Can they invest in projects to help the kind of energy projects the UK needs to meet its 2030 targets that it wants to get to? Can it get more local energy involved? Can we take communities with us in a far more focused way that helps support for tackling climate change and lower bills, and people see some tangible benefit from these projects from a local power plan point of view? Can GB Energy help build and maintain and support the supply chains that are going to be needed to do the kind of projects in the kind of scale that we need over the next 5 to 10 years to tackle climate change, to meet net zero and to meet this 2030 target? And then finally, there is an aspect of the sort of Great British Nuclear of getting some nuclear power stations done and dusted, and actually delivering power for the UK. And I'll just finish really with just noting that, as I've said, there is an awful lot of focus on energy in this new Labour Party government. But they've only been in power for 12 weeks. Some key decisions has already been made. We're seeing movement, for example, removing the onshore wind ban that had been in place for really practically for much of the Conservatives' era in government over the last 14 years. We're seeing movement on big infrastructure projects around solar farms and getting consents agreed and sorted, so they're not stuck in the planning system anymore. We're seeing lots of structural change, as I've described, NISO coming into being, GB Energy coming into being. There is legislation starting to get into Parliament to create these things and to move things into the positions that the Labour Party want. But the proof will be in the pudding of actual policy and legislation. And there is a lot of things that needs doing all at once. And I'm very conscious that there is an awful lot of things across all of things outside of energy that this government will want to do and that people will expect them to do. So there is a potential bandwidth issue for government to get things done quickly and in the order that they need to do it, and to make the decisions they need to make to get to, for example, clean power by 2030. So again, the jury is out on this government, but they have only been in power for 12 weeks or so, and there is a lot to do. I won't go through some of the things that I've noted there, but there is an awful lot on the books of decisions that will be of importance across the energy sphere, very specifically to large customers and brokers and the B2B sort of end of things that we're talking about today. Things like carbon border adjustment mechanisms, things about changing the way REGOs work, lots of stuff around how we're going to decarbonise and move to electrification where possible, or how do we get hydrogen going. All those kind of things will be really important. Regulation around third-party intermediaries and so on, and brokers, and how that kind of works. So lots of questions to consider, and we'll see where the government take these and the focus they put, and the priorities they put on them. But that's about it. I think I can see we've got a few questions, which is great to see. So thank you for that. There's definite themes coming through, so I'll try and take a few. So Giles, I can see, has asked, with the stated targets of Great British Energy of 2030, do we believe that's achievable? I think there are people that have said within NESO it is in the far end of achievability, but it is achievable. I think the one thing that we do have to understand is if government and the country are going to meet that clean power target by 2030, there will need to be significant change, very clearly in how quickly infrastructure gets built, both in the planning system and in the grid queues that the network companies, for example, give, and how we get a grid connection. But there needs to be significant change quickly. It will be very stretching to do what we need to do in the next 5-6 years. So let's say it's unlikely, but it's possible. And even if it's not achievable, it feels like it might be the catalyst for the kind of change that is needed to get us on that road to a more secure, cheaper and cleaner energy system as a whole. Then there's a number of questions I can see, questions from Edward, Stephen, Barry, others, that are talking about energy prices. And I think obviously this is really key. And there is clearly a tension, and there always has been really, with the amount of investment that needs to happen in the UK to reinvigorate the energy system as a whole, but particularly to change it for the future that's going to be better for demand side flexibility, all the kind of things we need, as well as connecting all the new generation of electricity sources that we need, etc., etc. There is a huge amount of investment there, and the people that will bring that investment to the table are obviously going to want to return on their investment over time. There is a tension between that and the need to lower prices. We have seen prices increase hugely, be very volatile because of the global situation with Ukraine and the Middle East, for example. And Labour Party and this new government will obviously need to show that they are aware that prices are too high and they need to come down. And the long-term plan, I think, is right. I think we are over-indexed on gas in this country. And the more we can electrify, the more we can use electricity from renewable sources in particular, and make sure that the lower prices are passed through to customers, and that customers are able to switch from using fossil fuels for example, transport and heating, will lower prices, but over the long term. So how does this government make sure that prices get lower quicker? There is a number of things, and one of the things that was picked up, I think it's Martin, I can see, talking about the cost difference between gas and electricity. Another really important point: if we are going to electrify where we can, we cannot continue to have the price of electricity artificially increased by placing policy costs on there, non-commodity costs on there, when they are not placed on gas prices in the same way. That gives an artificial, if you like, almost an implicit subsidy to using gas over electricity, which is going against what we want to do in this country. And you can see that sort of spark spread, as they call it, the difference between the price of gas and electricity, where it is high, and it is particularly high in this country compared to others. There is obviously a preference to use gas where they can rather than electricity. And the kind of technologies we need to use the electricity, heat pumps, electric vehicles, electrifying processes, which were using fossil fuels in the past, become that much harder to make as a commercial decision. So the key thing from a policy point of view that this new government needs to grasp is to remove those policy costs from domestic electricity prices as well as industrial electricity prices where they can. The problem will, of course, be that those prices the costs of those policies need to come from somewhere. They should, in reality, come from tax. That is the progressive way of doing it, the fairest way of getting that cost. But that's a very difficult situation at any time for politicians, never mind the kind of political inheritance this government has got for its economy and the wish to not raise taxes where it can. So I think putting it on tax will be a very difficult situation. The only other option is to put it on gas prices. And equally, that is not a great place to do. You're going to increase people's gas costs, heating costs at home when they can't, or at least they're in the transition from moving from gas to electricity, which is going to take a number of years. And obviously it's going to make potentially industry less competitive. So it is a really difficult political problem. I think there are ways and means to do it, transition it in small chunks and for example, maybe allow people that are switching to electrical heating in their home through a heat pump or whatever, moving from a boiler to a heat pump, for example, to get a rebate on their lobby costs, their policy costs for their electricity, so it lowers their prices for those, for example, and do it step by step. But we'll see. It is a thorny political problem, but there are a number of different things that need to be grasped by this government to lower prices, and there is areas in the rest of the energy priced formation that can be grasped. REMA, I can see Richard asked a question about what's the latest on REMA. Some of the market arrangements we have in the wholesale market, I know npower and E.ON have a real worry that the liquidity in the wholesale market is still a real problem, and that means that we cannot necessarily get the best prices for our customers that we should be able to get. And so there are steps that Ofgem, for example, should be taking to improve the liquidity in the wholesale market that would lower prices quite quickly if they did it. So there are a number of things that could be happening. We will continue to be working as best we can on behalf of our customers and ourselves to make sure that we can offer the best prices and we can change this system for the better. But I think I'll leave it there. That's probably enough from me. I hope that's been useful. I'm always contactable through the people you work with at MBS. If you have any very specific questions around policy, me and my team are always very happy to help. But thanks for listening. I hope that's been useful. Thank you.